A Long Voyage by Charles Dickens. When the wind is blowing and the sleet of rain is driving against the dark windows, I love to sit by the fire thinking of what I have read in books of voyage and travel. Such books have had a strong fascination for my mind from my earliest childhood, and I wonder it should have come to pass when I never have been around the world, never have been shipwrecked, ice and environed, tomahawked or eaten. Sitting on my ruddy heart in the twilight of New Year's Eve, I find the incidents of travel rise around me from all the latitudes and longitudes of the globe. We observe no order or sequence, but appeared and vanished as we will, come like shadows so depart. Columbus alone upon the sea with his deserted crew looks over the waste of waters from his high station on the poop of his ship, and sees the first uncertain glimmer of a light rising and falling with the waves like a talk on the bark of some fisherman, which is the shining star of a new world. Bruce is caged in Abyssinia, surrounded by the glory horrors which will often startle him out of his sleep at home when years have passed away. Franklin, come to the end of his unhappy overland journey, would it have been his last, lies perished of hunger with his brave companions, each a mason's figure stretched upon its miserable bed without a power to rise. All diving the very days between their prayers, their remembrance of a dear once at home, conversation on the pleasure of eating, the last named topic being ever present to them, likewise in their dreams. All the African travellers, wavering, solitary and sad, submit themselves again to drunken, murderous man's boat of the lowest order of humanity, and Mungo Park, fainting under a tree and surrounded by women, gratefully remembered whose good Samaritan has always come to him in woman shape to wipe world over. A shadow of a wall in which my mind eyes can discern some traces of a rocky seacoast recalls to me a fearful story of travel derived from that unpromising narrator of escapes with other prisoners from a penal settlement. It is an island, and they seize a boat and get to the mainland. Their way is by a rugged and precipitous seashore, and they have no earthly hope of ultimate escape from a party of soldiers dispatched by an easier course to cut them off. Must inevitably arrive at the distant bourne long before them, and retake them if by any hazard they survive the horrors of a way. Fame, as we all must have foreseen, beseems them early in their course. Some of the party die and are eaten, some are murdered by the wrist and eaten. This one awful creature eats his fill, sustains his strength, and lives on to be recaptable and taken back. The unrelatable experience through which we had passed have been so tremendous that he is not hanged as he might be, but goes back to his old chained gang work. A little time, and he tends one other prisoner away, sees another boat, and flies once more, necessarily in the old hopeless direction where he can take no other. He is soon cut off, and meet the Persian party face to face upon to the beach. He is alone. In his former journey he acquired an impenetrable relish for his dreadful food. He urged the new man away, expressly to kill him and eat him. In the pockets on one side of his coarse convict dress are portions of a man's body, and which he is regaling. In the pockets on the other side is an untouched store of salted pork, stolen before he left the island, for which he has no appetite. He is taken back, and he is hanged. I shall never see that sea beach on the wall, on the fire without him, solitary monster, eating as he prods along, while the sea raged and writhed at him. Captain Blight, a worse man to be entrusted with arbitrary power where could secretly be, is handed over the side of a bounty and turned adrift from the wide ocean in an open boat by order of Fletcher Tristan, one of his officers, in this very minute. Another flash of my fire, and the 1st October Christian, 520 years of age, son of a dead and gun Fletcher by a savage mother, leaps aboard his Majesty's ship Britain, hoofed off Pitcairn's Island, says a simple grace before eating in good English, and knows that a pretty little animal on board is calling a dog, because in his childhood he had heard of such strange creatures from his father and the other mutinous, growing grey under the shade of the breadfruit trees, speaking of a lost country far away. Several hulls while East Indiaman outward bound, driving immediately on a genuine night towards the rocks near Sea Cope on the island of Purbeck. The captain's 2 dear daughters are abroad, and 5 other ladies. The ship has been driven many hours, has 7 feet water in a hole, and her mainmast has been cut away. The description of her loss, familiar to me from my early boyhood, seemed to be read aloud as she rushed to her destiny. About 2 in the morning of Friday the 6th of January, the ship still driving and approaching very fast to the shore. Mr. Henry Merton, the second mate, went again into the cuddy where the captain then was. Another conversation taking place. Captain Price expressed extreme anxiety for the preservation of his beloved daughters, and earnestly asked the officer if he could devise any method of saving them. On this answering with great concern, but he feared it would be impossible, but that the only chance would be to wait for morning, the captain lifted up his hands in silent and distressful ejection. At this dreadful moment the ship struck with such violence as the dashed heads that were standing in the cuddy against the deck above them, and the shock was accompanied by a shriek of horror that burst at one instant from every quarter of the ship. Many of the seamen who had been remarked inactive and dismissed in their duty during great part of the storm, now poured in upon deck, where no exertion of the officers could keep them, while their assistance might have been useful. They had actually shulked in their hammocks, leaving the working of the pumps and other necessary labours to the officers of the ship and the soldiers, who had made uncommon exertions, rounded by a sense of their danger. The same seamen, at this moment, in frantic exclamation, demanded of heaven that the fellows suffered that succour with their own efforts, timely made, might possibly have procured. The ship continued to beat on the rocks, and soon billing fell with her broadside toward the shore. When it was struck, a number of men climbed up the inside stuff under an apprehension of immediately going to pieces. Mr. Merton, at this crisis, offered to his unhappy beings the best advice which could be given. He recommended that all should come to the side of a ship lying lowest on the rocks and single to take the opportunities which might then offer for escaping to the shore. Having thus provided to the utmost of his power for the safety of the desponding crew, he returned to the roundhouse, where by this time all the passengers and most of the officers had assembled. The latter were employed in offering consolation to the unfortunate ladies, and with unparalleled magnanimity suffering their compassion were the fair and amiable companions of a misfortune to rail over the sense of their own danger. In this charitable work of comfort Mr. Merton now joined, by assurance of his opinion that the ship would hold together till the morning, when all would be safe. Captain Pierce, observing one of the young gentlemen loud in his exclamation of terror, and frequently cried that the ship was parting, cheerfully bade him be quiet, remarking that before the ship should go to pieces he would not, but would be safe enough. It is difficult to convey a correct idea of the scene of this deplorable catastrophe without describing the place where it happened. The hulls were struck on the rock at a part of the shore where the cliff is of waist high and rises almost perpendicularly from its base. But at this particular spot the foot of the cliff is excavated into a cavern of 10 or 12 yards in depth, and of breadth equal to the length of a large ship. The sides of the cavern are so nearly upright as to be of extremely difficult access, and the bottom is strewed with sharp and uneven rocks, which seem, by some confusion of the earth, to have been detached from its roof. The ship lay with a broadside opposite to the mouth of this cavern, with her whole length stretched almost from side to side of it. But when it struck, it was too dark for the unfortunate person on board to discover the real magnitude of the danger and the extreme horror of such a situation. In addition to the company already in the roundhouse, they had admitted 3 women and 2 soldiers, wives, who, with the husband of one of them, had been allowed to come in, for the seamen, who had tumultuously demanded entrance and get the lights, had been opposed and kept out by Mr. Rogers and Mr. Brimer, the 3rd and 5th mates. The numbers were therefore now increased to near 50. Captain Pierce sat on a chair, a coat, and some other movable, with a daughter on each side, who he alternately pressed to his affectionate breast. The rest of the melancholy ensemble were seated on the deck, which was strewed with musical instruments and a rack of furniture and other articles. He also saw Mr. Merton, after having cut several wax candles in pieces and stuck them up in various parts of the roundhouse, and lighted up all the glass lanterns he could find, took his seat, intended to wait the approach of dawn, and then assist the partners of his danger to escape. But, observing that the poor ladies appeared parched and exhausted, he brought a basket of oranges and paraded on some of them to refresh himself by sucking a little of the juice. At this time we were all tolerably composed, except Miss Mansell, who has an hysteric fits on the floor of the deck of the roundhouse. But on Mr. Merton's return to the company, he perceived a considerable detonation in the appearance of the ship. The sides were visible giving way, the deck seemed to be lifting, and he discovered other strong indications which she could not hold much longer together. On this account, he attempted to go forward to look out, but immediately saw that the ship had separated in the middle, and that the fore part having changed its position, lay rather further out towards the sea. In such an emergency, when the next moment might plunk him into eternity, he determined to seize the present opportunity and follow the example of the crew and the soldiers, who were now quitting the ship in numbers and making their way to the shore, for quite ignorant of its nature and description. Among other expeditions, the inside stuff had been unshipped and attempted to be laid between the ship's side and some of the rocks, but without success, for it snapped asunder before it reached them. However, by the light of the lanthorn that the seaman handed from the skylight of the roundhouse to the deck, Mr. Merritt discovered a spear which appeared to be laid from the ship's side to the rock, and on the spear he resolved to attempt his escape. Accordingly, lying down upon it, he thrust himself forward. However, he soon found that it had no communication with the rock. He reached the end of it, and then slipped off, receiving a very violent bruise in his fall, and before he could recover his legs, he was washed off by the surge. He now supported himself by swimming until a returning wave dashed him against the back part of the cavern. Here he laid hold of a small projection in the rock, but was so much benumbed when he was on the point of quitting it, when a seaman, who had already gained a footing, extended his hand and assisted him until he could secure himself a little rock, with which he clambered on a shelf still higher and out of reach of the surf. Mr. Roger, the third mate, remained with the captain and the unfortunate ladies in the companies nearly 20 minutes after Miss Merton had quitted the ship. Soon after the latter left the roundhouse, the captain asked what was become of him, to which Mr. Roger replied that he was gone on deck to see what could be done. After this, a heavy sea breaking over the ship, the ladies exclaimed, "Oh, poor Merton! He's drowned! Had he stayed with us he would have been safe." And we all, particularly Miss Mary Pierce, expressed great concern at the apprehension of his loss. The sea was now breaking in the fore part of the ship, and reached as far as the mainmast. Captain Pierce gave Mr. Rogers a nod, they lit a lamp, and went together into the stern gallery, where, after viewing the rocks for some time, Captain Pierce asked Mr. Roger if he thought there was any possibility of saving the girls, to which he replied that he feared there was none, for they could only discover the black faces of the peculiar rock and of the cavern which afforded shelter to those who escaped. They then returned to the roundhouse, and Mr. Roger hung up the lamp, and Captain Pierce sat down between his two daughters. The sea continuing to break in very fast, Mr. Mackermouse, a midshipman, and Mr. Schutz, a passenger, asked Mr. Roger what he could to do to escape. "Follow me," he replied, and we all went into the stern gallery, and from whence to the upper quarter gallery on the poop. While there a very heavy sea fell on board, and the roundhouse gave way, Mr. Rogers heard the ladies shriek in intervals as the water reached them. The noise of the sea at other times drowned their voices. Mr. might follow him to the poop, where we remained together about 5 minutes, when, on the breaking of this heavy sea, we jointly seized an hen coop. The same wave which proved fatal to some of those below carried him and his companion to the rock, on which they were violently dashed and miserably bruised. Here on the rock were 27 men, but it now being low water, and as we were convinced with one of the following of the tide all must be washed off, many attempts to get back of the sides of the cavern beyond the reach of the returning sea. Scarcely more than 6, besides Mr. Roger and Miss Burma, succeed. Mr. Roger, on gaining a station, was so nearly exhausted, but had this exhaustion been portrayed only a few minutes longer, he must have sunk under one. He was now prevented from joining Mr. Merton by at least 20 men between them, none of whom could move without the imminent peril of his life. They found with a very considerable number of a crew, seamen and soldiers, and some petty officers in the same situation as himself. For many who had reached the rocks below perished in attending to his scant. We could yet discern some part of a ship, and a gradual station solacing himself with the hopes of it remaining entirely until daybreak, for in the midst of their own distress the suffering of the females on board affected them with most poignant anguish, and the receiver broke inspired them with terror for their safety. But, alas, their apprehensions were too soon released. Within a very few minutes of a time that Mr. Rogers gained the rock, an universal shriek, which long vibrated in their ears, in which the voice of female distress was lamentably disgusted, announced the dreadful catastrophe. In a few moments all was hushed, except the roaring of winds and the dashing of waves. The wreck was buried in the deep, and none in a tome of it was ever afterwards seen. The most beautiful and affecting incident I know, associated with a shipwreck, succeeds this dismal story of Fall Winter Night. The crossing over East Indiaman homeward bound goes ashore on the coast of Caffraria. It is resolved that the officer, passengers, and crew in number 135 souls shall in the road penetrate on foot across trackless deserts, and feast by wild beasts and cruel savages to the Dutch settlement at the Cape of Good Hope. With this fallen object before them, they finally separate into two parties, never more to meet on earth. There is a solitary child among the passengers, a little boy of 7 years old, who has no relation there, and when the first party is moving away, he cries after some member of it who had been kind to him. The crying of a child may be supposed to be a little thing to me in man in such great extremity, but it touches me, and he is immediately taken into that detachment, from which time forth this child is suddenly made a scared charge. He is pushed on a little raft across broad rivers by the swimming sailors who carried him by turns through the deep sand and long grass, he patiently walking all our times. We share with him such potted fish, and we find to eat. We lie down and wait for him when the rough carpenter becomes a specialist friend lags behind. Beside by lions and tigers, by savages, by thirst, by hunger, by death in a crowd of ghastly shapes, we never, O Father for all mankind, may your name be blessed for it, forget this child. The captain stops exhausted, and his faithful coxswain goes back, and it seemed to sit down by his side, and neither of the two shall be any more beheld until the great last day. But as the rest go on for their lives, we take the child with them. The carpenter dies of poisonous berries eaten in starvation, and the steward succeeded to the command of a party, succeed to the sacred guardianship of a child. God knows all he does for the poor baby, how he cheerfully carries him in his arms when he himself is weak and ill, how he feeds him when he himself is gripped with want, how he folds his ragged jacket around him, lays his little worn face with a woman's tenderness upon his sobbing breast, soothes him in his sufferings, sings to him as he limps alone, unmindful of his own patient bleeding feet. Divided for a few days from the rest, we dig a grave in the sand and bury our good friends, the cooper, these two companions alone in the wilderness. And when the time comes when we both are ill, and back our reached partners in aspire, we used in few number now to wait by them one day. We'll wait by them one day, we'll wait by them 2 days. The morning of the third, we move very softly about in making their preparations in the resuming of a journey, for the child is sleeping by the fire, and it is agreed with one consent that he shall not be disturbed until the last moment. The moment comes, the fire is dying, and the child is dead. His faithful friend, the steward, lingers but a little while behind him. His grief is great, is stagged on for a few days, lies down in the desert and dies. But he shall be reunited in his immortal spirit, or conducted with a child, when he and the poor carpenter shall be rising up with the words, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, ye have done it unto me. As I recall the disappearance and disappearance of nearly all the participants, it was the once famous shipwreck, a mere handful being recovered at last, and the legend which were long afterwards rerided from time to time among the English officers of the Cape, of a woman with an infant, said to have been seen weeping outside the savage hut, far in the interior, was whispering associated with remembrance of the missing ladies saved from a wrecked vessel, and who was often sought but never found. Thoughts of another kind of travel come into my mind. Thoughts of a voyager unexpectedly summoned from home, who travelled a vast distance and could never return. Thoughts of his unhappy wayfare in the depths of his sorrow, and the bitterness of his anguish, and the helplessness of his self-reproach, and the desperation of his desire to set right what he had left wrong and do what he had left undone. For there were many, many things he had neglected. Little matters when he was at home and surrounded by them, but things of mighty moment when he was in the immeasurable distance. There were many, many blessings what he had inadequately felt. There were many trivial injuries what he had not forgiven. There was love what he had but poorly returned. There was friendship what he had too light prized. There were a million kind words what he might have spoken, a million kind looks what he might have given, uncountable slight easy deeds in which he might have been most truly great and good. Oh, for a day, he would exclaim, for but one day to make amends. But the sun never shone upon that happy day, and out of his remote captivity he never came. Why does this traveller's fate obscure on New Year's Eve the other histories of travellers with which my mind was filled but now, and cast a sombre shadow over me? Must I one day make his journey? Even so, who shall say whether I may not then be tortured by such late regrets, whether I may not when look for my exile on my empty place in undone work? I stand upon the seashore, where the waves are years, they break and fall, and I may little heed them. But with every wave the sea is rising, and I know what ever float me on this traveller's voyage at last.